Hello, Namaskar. Welcome to my pod, the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis. My name is Juggi Bhasin. To watch this show, all you have to do is to press that red button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. And we would also really appreciate if you could like this video and share this video with your friends. Okay, the topic for today's podcast is a very interesting one. It is that whether content creators or creative people should they become political or should they indulge in politics, especially of the cheap variety. I'll of course give you my answer a little later on, but let's take up some very interesting examples. The biggest example, of course, being that of this gentleman called Kunal Kamra, who's in hot water right now because of the comments he has made about the Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra. And he's been summoned by the cops. He has to report to the cyber cell. His studio has been smashed up. And there might be some people who might be feeling that he doesn't really deserve all this. But I can promise you one thing, that a large majority of people, a lot of people actually feel that he had it coming. He deserves what he is getting right now because his comments are outrageous, to say the least. Now, I'm not certainly advocating that there should be restrictions or fetters on freedom of expression. And certainly on, comedy. Comedy is probably one of the highest forms of freedom of expression. As somebody, because I am a writer, I also act on stage, and I have always believed completely in the freedom of expression, but certainly with responsibility, I would add in my case. I would certainly not argue that there should be fetters on the freedom of expression, but when people say that it has to be within the confines of not being disrespectful to people or hurtful to people or deliberately causing a lot of anguish to people, then there is a point in that. Remember the time also when there used to be eminent cartoonists like R.K. Lakshman, and through the ordinary man, through the common man, he used to depict all kinds of political satire. The point which I'm saying is that it's absolutely okay to have political satire. There's nothing wrong with it. It is something absolutely kosher. It should be done. But when you start calling people names, when you start calling people a traitor, you start branding them, then it appears that you are following not only a political agenda, but you are probably acting on somebody's political agenda. Maybe you're being paid to do so. That, by the way, is also being investigated. And if you remember, this was the same gentleman who, quite some time back, he almost hounded the journalist Arnab Goswami in a plane. When the plane was taking off, he behaved rather miserably, I would say. He's been in controversy quite often, all because of his intemperate views. So whether intemperate remarks, offensive remarks constitute free speech, that is an entirely different debate altogether. But let's confine ourselves to the very fact that, yes, there is, of course, space for political satire. There is, of course, space for criticism of the government. But should we get personal? Should we get offensive? Should we get, start making disparaging, crude remarks? The answer, flat answer, I would say right in the beginning, is a flat no. That's Kunal Kamra. But then he's not the only one. There have been other celebrities also very recently who have been in the news for all the wrong reasons. The number two celebrity, which I'm talking about, is Rachel Zegler. Rachel Zegler is that star of the new movie from Disney, that is Snow White. I'm not sure if it's called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I think it's just called Snow White. And that movie has been made to an astronomical $450 million or something. And I believe it has completely bombed at the box office. And the reason for that is very, very simple, because Rachel Zegler has been making politically offensive remarks for quite some time, despite being told to just shut up and keep stitch her mouth and not say anything political, but she has been doing that completely. If you remember, she made those famous remarks about the new president of the United States and said that the supporters of that president may never know peace. And she's made other remarks about the free Palestine and lots of other things. She just doesn't know how to keep quiet. So Rachel Zegler is not only paying a price, and her performance, I haven't seen the film. I don't know how her performance has been. But the fact is that has affected the fortunes of the film, and it is now said that Disney Studios could lose up to $500 million because of the bombing of this movie, Snow White, all because Rachel Zegler could not keep her mouth shut. That's Rachel Zegler for you. The number three example, which I want to give you, is that of Selena Gomez. Again, part of a very popular series, Murders Only, in this building. And again, she went on a rant not some time back, where on an Instagram post, she was actually crying and weeping. And what was she crying and weeping against? Against the United States ICE agents are, of course, these law enforcement agents who are rounding up all the illegals. And her heart was going out to the illegals who were being rounded up. And then, of course, there was a backlash, and there were people who were saying that they in fact traced the fact that Selena Gomez herself could be some kind of an illegal in the country, and why shouldn't she also be deported? So she also faced a huge backlash. And it doesn't only stop there. Then all the big time actors of Hollywood, people like Robert De Niro, George Clooney, Tom Hanks, I mean, the great Tom Hanks. And film after film, Tom Hanks has delighted us with his wonderful performances. My personal favorite is, of course, Saving Private Ryan. And the same Tom Hanks, after the new president of the United States was sworn in, he goes on a TV show where he wears a MAGA hat. MAGA is, of course, Make America Great Again hat. And in that parody, he pretends to be a MAGA supporter who is a racist. He doesn't want to shake hands with a black man. This is what Tom Hanks depicted, which was really in very poor taste. Now, all three gentlemen, that is Robert De Niro, Tom Hanks, George Clooney, all of them, of course, are completely opposed to the present political dispensation in the United States. They have made their displeasure felt, so on. But then they have been facing a backlash also because of that. For instance, Robert De Niro's latest movie, The Alto Nights, it has opened very, very poorly. The movie won't even recover the amount which has been spent on making of that movie, all because all these three gentlemen could not keep their mouths shut. And therefore, the question which I'm asking is, and which is the most pertinent question today, is that what is the need for creators, creative people to wear their political affiliations on their sleeve? Why do they have to be so they're vocal about it? Why do from every nook and corner, through every forum, through every podcast, through every transmission, that they have to keep telling people how much they hate a political dispensation in the country, whether it be it in the US, whether it be it in India? The same problem is in India also. We all know some of the actors, both male and female, who constantly make these disparaging remarks about political dispensation, especially the current political dispensation. Because I'm arguing in this podcast is that what number one, all this talk really does is that it is certainly not good for the commercial box office success of enterprises, because please remember, films, for instance, is a very expensive medium. A lot of money has been sunk into a project, and because of the utterances of these creators, of these content creators, of these creative people, the fortunes of that project suffer. That's the first part. But the more important thing, which I believe, is that all this political talk actually takes away from the real creativity of the project. For instance, at the end of the day, if I am to see Snow White, if I have to see what kind of a remake they have done of the earlier Snow White classic, which I think came in the 50s, then I want to see the obviously the actress who's depicting it. I want to see the way they have treated the concept of not only Snow White, which some would argue could be a little on racial stereotypes, then how they have treated the seven dwarfs. But none of that becomes important. None of that is in the news, because the only thing which is in the news, it's not the creativity of the film, but the fact that Rachel Ziegler made those comments about the present political dispensation. That is all which is there in the public mind. And then they have been there are these videos which people have taken of cinema halls in the US where the halls are completely empty. Snow White, there are nobody's going inside, and it's not only the supporters of the present political dispensation who don't want to see this movie, but even the others, they have been completely turned off by the utterances of this actress. So it deflects from the creativity, from the creative content, because at the end of the day, a creative project has to speak for itself. It has to stand on its legs because of its innate creativity and not because of the political utterances of its lead cast. That is the most important thing that we have to keep in mind. And if you remember all the great projects, all the great films, all the great creative outputs of when you go back in decades, then yes, even then actors and actresses of course had their political affiliations, but they never used to be, that disease was not there that they had to make those utterances in public and affect the fortunes of the project itself. The film used to be completely divorced from this menace, from this affliction, I would say, and that's why the films are so great at that time, and therefore it affects the creativity of the project. The second part is that what really happens when such a thing happens is when the cast or the important members of the cast make these political statements, is that they at one go exclude a sizable section of the movie watching audience, or let's say in Kunal Kamra's case, of there is a sizable section of people who will never turn up to listen to what he has to say or see whatever he is enacting. They won't do that because they know the kind of stuff this man or this person is capable of. So you at one go exclude an entire chunk of the audience by your brashness, by your political utterances. And the case of, again, Snow White in America, um, more than half the country would have actually, from the word go, would have boycotted the film because they don't want to see it, because you are making these politically explosive statements day in and day out. So therefore you do a disservice to the producers, you do a disservice to all the hard working production people who have toiled to make that movie, to the millions of jobs on the line by your careless, your comments, your political comments. Because again, let's take the case of, again, Kunal Kamra. If Kamra was doing that show at the club which was smashed up by the Shiv Sainiks, then please remember, it's somebody has been paying for that particular show. There is some producer behind that particular show. He has invested money in that. The hall has been hired, money has been paid, tickets have been sold. There is money involved in that. There are jobs on the line. There might even be careers on the line. And therefore, this man, by his brashness, is not only landing himself in a hot soup, but he is making sure that all the ecosystem around that project, everybody gets in hot soup, everybody faces the music, everybody comes under the radar. Okay, and that's the big problem, which a lot of people, either they know about it probably, but they don't want to think about it because for narrow partisan ends, they keep on saying these things. And therefore, a lot of people are asking this question, is that, are you saying this because you have been paid to say this, or because you are affiliated to a political entity or to a political party? These are legitimate questions which are cropping up. Number three, what you're also doing by these things is that you are misusing your position as a content creator. See, there are all kinds of content creators. There are minor content creators. There are mid-level content creators. There are, of course, very senior, very well-known content creators. And by content creators, I'm talking about creative people. I'm talking of actors and actresses. I'm talking of writers. I'm talking of podcasters. There's a certain position, there's a certain legitimacy, there's a certain respect which you command in society, and therefore you misuse your position, you have a certain power, that is because of your positioning, and you therefore misuse your power to project political partisanship of political entities. That is your desired objective, and not so much as to impress people with your creative content. And that is the contradiction which is appearing in all these show after show after show. This is what we really need to keep in mind. And then the added problem which comes along with this is that it shows a certain level of, I would say, intolerance for other political beliefs and political convictions and political ideologies. I mean, you can be, let's say, for instance, in real life, you can be a Democrat or you can be a Republican. But when you are saying these things, you are saying that I have no tolerance left for the other side, which means at one go, you exclude, as I said, more than 50% of the population from your shows. And therefore, it becomes like an incestuous thing that, it's a close group of people sharing the same political ideology, the same political beliefs, who want to watch or see or whatever you want to do, whatever offensive remarks you want to make. That is not, to my mind, creativity in no stretch of the imagination. You can call it creativity. You can call it, there's a word which is known as political didacticism. Political didacticism means that political content with an intention to teach or preach. That's the objective there. Then there is no creativity left. It is dried of all creativity. We need to keep this thing in mind. And then it is also important to remember that the overall content, the overall packaging of the offering, the overall contours, the overall, in Hindi there's a word called the overall masala of the entire package which you're putting out in public becomes absolutely third rate and mediocre. It is not a superior product. Why? Because it has been tainted with with malicious content, that is content of a political kind. The creativity has been sucked out of that particular offering, and therefore it becomes second or third rate, and therefore it has no value, no meaning in the eyes of the public. Because please remember, any content where people start, preaching, where they start moralizing, where the content is one sided, and above all, it all becomes after sometimes very, very boring. And this is what actually people like Kunal Kamra and company reduce their utterances, they reduce their whatever little bit of creativity or not, or whatever they have in them, they reduce it to boring spectacles, boring, offensive spectacles, where the only thing you remember about that entire offering of the entire spectacle is some offensive one liner or one word which you have said. There's nothing else which you remember about that. If Kunal Kamra thinks that he can anyway come to the standard of, let's say, an R.K. Lakshman, then it would probably take him a million years to do that. He could never do that. As I said, even today, politicians of all stripe, of all variety, of all hue, shade, color, of all convictions, everybody loves R.K. Lakshman today. And even today, nobody knows that R.K. Lakshman was on which side. He, through his common man, in cartoon after cartoon in the Times of India, he used to show political satire. But nobody could guess that whether he was on the side of the Congress or whether he was on the side of the erstwhile Jan Sangh, or whether he was right wing, left wing, centrist, or whatever he was. Which is the beauty of the man, because the beauty of his creative offerings to the public, where you could not guess his own political affiliation. And that's the way it should be with creative content. And unfortunately, the lesson has been lost. And even on the greats of cinema, as I said, Robert De Niro. I mean, my generation has grown up watching films like Taxi Driver, the great Robert De Niro. And it is so sad today to see him descend into this kind of political blasphemous, utterances which he keeps making all the time. George Clooney, as I said, Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is the biggest disappointment, really, in that sense. So it's sad. It's really sad, because at the end of the day, the content, as I said, becomes predictable. It becomes really boring. It becomes totally one-sided, not worthwhile to watch it. And I will leave you then giving you two examples of people, or of directors especially, who had a certain kind of a political affiliation. And yet they rose above their political affiliation to make some of the greatest political films of all time, where you marvel at the films because of the creativity in it, because of the human story in it. I'm referring to two films. The first is M.S. Satyu, who made the great film Garam Hawa. M.S. Satyu was a leftist. He was definitely a hardcore leftist. But in Garam Hawa, it's not about left, right, or whatever. It is about a human story where you feel for the film. It is, to my mind, even today, the finest political film which is made in India. And Garam Hawa was that great, great film. And even though MS Satyu could never repeat himself what he did in Garam Hawa, but he was a leftist, as I said, but he still made a great film because he kept his political whatever views out of the film. And that's why it was such a great film. And the other example which I want to give you is a film called, if you get the chance, you can watch it maybe on YouTube or somewhere. It's a film called Z by a director called Costa Gravas. Again, probably with the greatest political film which has been ever been made in world cinema. And again, Costa Gravas was a leftist, but he made a great, great film. And it is a political film, but it is not in your face politics. It is a searing film. It is a film which completely, it leaves a mark on you. And so many other political films have been inspired from Z. The point which I'm making is that you might be having whatever political convictions, you might be having whatever political affiliation, but you can still make a great project work. You can still produce creative offerings which are interesting, which are many dimensional, certainly not one sided. All you have to do is to keep your political affiliations aside and focus on the creative content. And this, unfortunately, the Kunal Kamras of the world, the Rachel Zeglers of the world, even, sorry to say, Robert De Niro, Tom Hanks, and George Clooney's of the world are not doing presently. And that is why we have this absolutely ordinary, third rate, one sided content which is coming out, which people are rejecting. And, well, the show still goes on, but let's really hope that some of these greats, especially, see the light of the day and this trend is reversed and we get to see interesting content again one day on our screens, on our laptops, on a podcast, on wherever else we are watching them. And so, on this note, I come to the end of this particular podcast. I hope you really like this podcast. You like our show, do again subscribe to it. It's very simple. I'll repeat that again. Press that red button you see on your screen. You become a subscriber. And on that very, very cheerful note, it's goodbye and cheers from me till next time.